Hello, everyone, and welcome to the briefing room. My name is Erwin Jackson, and I'm the head of Australia programs at Climateworks. It's actually my fourth day at Climateworks. I've had the privilege of watching the progress of the organisation over the last 15 years and excited to be joining you today to be guiding the discussion on how and digging into what Australia's election means for climate policy in Australia and in the Southeast Asian region. But first, let's acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we're dialing into for today. I acknowledge the traditional owners in the lands and the waters of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and future, and extend my respect to any First Nations people who are joining us today. Um, please feel free to go into the chat and let us know where you're dialing in from. Also thought it'd be good to acknowledge that we've had a lot of extreme weather around Australia in recent times. I hope you, your families and friends are all okay. So I'll kick off with the great pleasure of introducing the three panelists today. If you've come along to your first Climateworks briefing room of 2025, you might recognise some of the speakers. The first is Anna Malos, who's Climateworks' Australia Country Lead. Her Climateworks and organisation of the Australian and economic landscape before joining knowledge and policy expertise from her previous roles in the Victorian and UK governments. Then we have Trang, who's head of our international programs and engagement, leading Climateworks' growing portfolio of programs and partnerships in Vietnam, Indonesia, and across the region. Trang brings more than a decade of experience working with governments on climate and international development. And of course, we have our last speaker, last but not least, is the Climateworks' CEO, Anna Skarbek. Anna has led the organisation since its launch since 2009 and holds various board positions, including at the Net Zero Economy Authority, the SEC in Victoria, the Green Building Council of Australia, the Centre for New Energy Technologies, and the Asia Pacific, and is the Asia Pacific board member of the GFANZ network, which is a global financial alliance seeking to support and get to net zero. So over the next hour, we're going to hear from all our panelists on what the election outcome means for emission reductions, regional cooperation, and key policy opportunities. I should acknowledge up front that we've actually received dozens of pre-submitted questions. We'll be answering some of those during the panel session, but we'll also be taking questions at the end. So feel free to submit them anytime using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So let me kick off today's discussion with a question to all of the panelists. Last month, we saw the return of an expanded Labor government alongside a suite of climate progressive independents. What do you think this result means for climate action over the next term in Australia and the region? And we might kick off and hear first from Anna Malos, and then we'll throw to Trang and Anna. So Anna.
Thanks, Erwin. And, good to have you on board at Climateworks. So first off, I'd like to note that Australia has elected a government with the votes to increase climate action. It was clearly an energy election with very different policies put to the voters. The ALP, the Greens, and many of the independents had strong commitments for renewable energy and for phasing out coal-fired generation. And, the kinds of votes showed the importance of this to the Australian electorate. Climate action was less heavily discussed, both in the media and sort of the priority that voters put on it, compared to the 2022 election, but there was still a clear difference in policies that voters were considering. Again, the ALP, the Greens, and many of the independents were very clear that climate action was important to them and that reaching net zero by 2050 or before was a priority. Now, quick note on the results themselves, and noting that the AEC has only just finalised these. So in the House of Representatives, the ALP won a large majority with 94 seats, noting that 76 or more is a majority. That was 16 more than they came into the election. Beyond those likely to vote in favour of climate action, the Greens have 1 seat. 11 of the independents and minor parties would be considered progressive. That's what's labelled others here. The coalition won 43 seats, 29 in the Liberal Party room and 14 with the Nationals. Now looking at the Senate. Here, the ALP does not have a majority. They've got 29 votes and they need 39, so they're 10 short. Now, this lack of a majority is typical in Australia over the last few decades. But the ALP can combine with the Greens that have 10 seats. The others likewise have 10 seats, but they're quite varied and they're much more varied than in the lower house. Probably consider that 4 to maybe 6 are likely to vote in favour of climate action, with 4 definitely likely to vote against it. The coalition has 27 seats. That's 23 sitting with the Liberals, 4 with the Nationals. So if you think about the majority, the ALP has to get either the support of the Greens, all of a very diverse others group, or get the coalition on side to pass legislation. On the flip side, the coalition would have to sort of group with both the Greens and some of the crossbench to block legislation. So in short, this government will be looking to improve Australia's renewable energy and really go after that goal of Australia being a renewable energy superpower, and it's got the votes to do so.
Trang.
Thanks, Erwin, and thanks, Anna. I think from the international collaboration perspective, the election results also ensure continuity in providing on climate policy from the international end. And I think the stability is really crucial for Australia's, especially the country is seeking to co-host COP31 with the Pacific nation and position Australia in the global climate diplomacy. The second part is around narratives around green economy and trade. Anna mentioned some of the initiatives related to clean energy and future made in Australia. So this not only drives domestic economic growth, but this also opens the avenue for trade partnership with some of the close allies and partners in the South Asia region. And that means a lot of opportunity for developing regional supply chain for clean technology and renewable energies. And the third part is around the financing. The government has demonstrated a commitment to increasing climate finance, especially to its close partners, such as South Asian nations and the Pacific Islands. So as Australia prepare to co-host the COP31, there's an expectation that this will be further scaling of climate financing and technical assistance to support regional decarbonization efforts. That's all from me. Thank you, Erwin.
Great, thank you. Anna.
Overall, it creates a further 3 years of policy continuity and momentum, and that is really important. We've got to remember that the last term of government was the first time a national government in Australia had a legislated net zero emissions target and had committed to a plan to achieve it. So significant policy foundations were set up in the last term, but they're not yet completed or have had long to run. So the implementation of those must happen this term and more. There is a lot to do to reorient an entire economy towards net zero. And we're in the thick of much of that, and we'll discuss more of that today. So the clear election result means that we don't lose momentum in policy circles in working on all of that across all of those sectoral areas. And that is crucial when the climate science clock is ticking.
Thanks, Anna. Let's dig a bit more into the specifics. So, Anna Malos, what climate policies and actions do you think are the highest priority and can have the biggest impact in this term of government?
As Anna mentioned, this is a big job and a big challenge, and it will have to be action right the way across government. First off, I'd say there's two overarching and urgent priorities that interconnect. By September this year, the government will have to submit its national emissions reduction target for 2035. That's to the UNFCCC as part of its nationally determined contribution known as an NDC. This target has to be more ambitious than its previous one for 2030, and it's expected to represent Australia's best efforts. The government's shortly going to receive advice from the Climate Change Authority about this target, and then it will be a cabinet decision. Climateworks Centre's modelling in late 2023 suggested that by 2035, Australia could reduce emissions by 85% below 2005 levels. And so, however, that top line target, whatever it ends up being, it's a goal and it's a really important signal of intent. But perhaps what's more important is how the government is going to get there, how it plans to act, so its policies and investments. At the moment, the government's developing an overarching net zero plan, as well as sectoral plans for electricity and energy, for industry, for resources, the built environment, transport, and for the land and agriculture sector. Climateworks is bringing, our analysis and thought leadership to ensure that government is making these plans ambitious and achievable and really understanding where the opportunities are across the economy. So this brings me to a suite of priorities, really. We've got a priority for each of these sectors. In each sector, there are these very clear opportunities where policy can drive further change and make the most of new opportunities. This is going to help Australians benefit from the emerging green economy, from new export opportunities that Trang and I will talk about further, and from affordable clean energy and reduced pollution. There's major challenges and barriers, but there are solutions. Starting with energy and electricity, we really see the biggest opportunity for change is more on the demand side. So about how and when households, businesses and industry use energy, and increasingly how they generate and store it. And I'll come back to this in a little bit more detail. That plan for energy and electricity links strongly to opportunities in the built environment. We want Australian buildings to become best in class for energy performance. Housing in particular is a bit poor at the moment, especially compared with internationally, which means that we have higher energy bills and lower comfort than otherwise we could. So government can ensure better design, better insulation, particularly in new buildings, but also improving existing ones, and better equipment. Climateworks has looked at this in a lot of detail over the last decade, and the kind of opportunities we've identified include improving energy performance by getting off of the use of gas and electrifying instead. Our work shows these changes are win-win-win. They reduce household and business expenditure, they lower overall investments in Australia's energy system, and they also reduce our emissions. And we've also focused on industry, particularly involving key stakeholders, and the ways we can transform the industry and resources sectors. For Climateworks, priority here really is making sure that Australia is making the most of the ability for decarbonisation to unlock economic and productivity outcomes. Again, this connects to energy use, particularly how facilities can switch from coal and gas to renewable energy. And it really ties into, improving Australia's economy overall. So the government has talked about the Future Made in Australia agenda. They introduced the National Reconstruction Fund, and they really reinvigorated the safeguard mechanism, which particularly focuses on industrial emissions. And there's a planned review in this term of Parliament, they've also set up place-based initiatives, including the Net Zero Economy Authority. On transport, Australia is lagging behind the world on the uptake of electric vehicles. And because of the nature of our continent and our economy, we have very high dependence on road transport. Ensuring Australians have access to a range of affordable EVs and businesses can make the best use of new technology will have been helped by the new vehicles emissions standard that was introduced at the start of this year. But it's, it will undergo a review in this term of government. And our work's also showed that it's very important to look beyond EVs and look at, that's only part of the story. It's looking at public transport and active transport to reduce passenger emissions. And in freight, it's not only unlocking, access to new technologies, but it's also making distribution systems more efficient, especially for that final few miles of delivery. So we're expecting that forthcoming transport plan to really look at a diverse range of solutions well beyond EVs. Now, all of these changes will also need new investment and changes to how investment flows within the economy. There's a number of levers the government can pull around its own investments. I mentioned the National Reconstruction Fund, but also through the Sustainable Finance Roadmap. Again, Climateworks has teams working on this and working on how we can support governments and others to change. And last but not least, I'd mention how the sort of decarbonising the economy sits alongside the broader agenda around nature. The land sector and nature are crucial to reduce net emissions, making the most of Australia's opportunity in that global environment, and also adapting to climate changes that unfortunately are already locked in. You mentioned the extreme weather. We've developed tools to assist governments to plan across these multiple objectives and to inform environmental approvals to make sure that changes are meeting a high standard, but also really making the most of the change that we can see is possible. Agriculture can still be very productive in the new economy, and that is so crucial, not only to regional economies, but to all of us. I'll sort of wrap up for the moment there, knowing that we'll go into a bit more detail in a number of these.
Thanks, Anna. You and I have collaborated for a number of years, and you mentioned the new makeup of the Parliament in the introduction, but one of the hallmarks of climate policy over the years has been how contested it is and how such a complex area of national policy it is in reality. In terms of the sort of other foundations that can be built upon this term, what are the things we need to be doing in terms of making sure we actually build the stability and policy that we need to deliver climate ambitions?
You mentioned that climate change is a complex problem. It's, and it needs a complex solution. Any major change like this does need to understand how to respond to a variety of different views and to really work out how to get people on board. There are many areas where there'll be high levels of change to the economy, to the kind of jobs that people are doing, and to the infrastructure. Now, these are represented by a whole range of the different parties, and there's not yet clear consensus about how to go forward. Now, it touches every part of our economy, and it touches sort of all communities in very different ways, and it will be contested at some level. That degree of change always is going to be. It is important to note that it's not just about the federal government. So yes, we've had a federal election, but as important are the different layers of government, so the states and territories, and also our local governments. Alongside that, businesses, investors, communities, us as individuals, all need to, we all have a role. It's not just about sort of, a silver bullet by government coming in and doing a new policy. So all those different organisations and parts have a role in coming up with the answers and promoting solutions. You know, that's why Climateworks is so active in this space. It's not just about government. And it really is about understanding how economic change can be unlocked at the same time as we reduce emissions. Now, that needs to be a conversation with communities. It needs to be a conversation with workers, because skills, you know, the skills people need will change, and the kind of jobs that are available will change. That's why something like the Net Zero Economy Authority is so important, because it's really looking place by place. It's looking where the biggest change is going to be, and it has a clear role around skills and jobs. And I would add that, you know, sort of the last term of government introduced something called mandatory financial disclosures around climate risk. That's where investors and businesses have to say what risks they see are, you know, acting on their business and how to respond to them. And alongside that, we also need government to be doing the same thing. So looking at the climate risks within government and looking how every bit of government, both as a kind of operating organisation as well as a policy setter, can really take part. And it's about reaching out to those with different views, understanding what the barriers are, understanding those challenges, and trying to meet people where they're at and show, you know, how this big change actually can benefit all of us.
Thanks, Anna. I might jump over to Trang now and sort of continue on the sort of theme of stability, if you like. Trang, in a piece you just recently wrote for The Diplomat, you said the Australian election results offers certainty to a region in flux. What kind of certainty do you think is most valuable right now to our regional partners?
Thanks, Erwin. Sorry, I just tried to put the unmute button. So there's a lot of, when I did refer to stability in the beginning of the session. So right now, our regional partners are looking for stability that they can really count on, especially in two key areas, on economy and the climate. And these two things can go actually hands in hands. South Asia has been dealing with a lot of external shock lately, rising global tension, higher tariffs, cuts to international trade. So for a region that really central to global manufacturing, that sort of create a lot of uncertainty about trade and future growth for the region. At the same time, many countries in the region have made very strong climate commitments, but they need more clarity around how the global shift to net zero is actually going to happen and how they can actually be part of that transition, not being left behind. So that's where Australia can really make a difference here. Australia already trade more with ASEAN than with Japan or the US. Vietnam and Indonesia imported, in 2022, Vietnam and Indonesia imported $1.7 billion worth of Australian iron ore. And it's expected that the new steel plants in these two countries are set to more than double in production capacity in the next years to come. So there's a lot of opportunity for trade between two regions. It's also worth noting that by 2040, South Asia is expected to become the fourth largest economy in the world. So it makes sense that they're really looking for stable, reliable partners who can grow and grow sustainably together. And the government South Asia economic strategy to 2040, it's really all about that. It focuses on building partnerships in areas like renewable energy manufacturing, and also supporting the skills and the technology needed for the transition. Climateworks Net Zero Industrial Precincts program are designed to actually address exactly this kind of collaboration. We support clean manufacturing in Australia, Indonesia, Vietnam, so that we can bring more renewable green jobs and better environment to the region. But to make it work, we really need to strong ties, stable partnership, stable supply chain, market connection with the region. And that's the kind of certainty that we expect Australia can continue to offer to the region in the years to come.
Thanks. That's a really good segue to actually one of the pre-submitted questions we received. It was from Bodhi. Apologies if my Queensland accent destroyed that. In Jakarta. And their question is, given the results of the election, what can we expect from Australia's policy towards climate finance in ASEAN countries?
Thank you, Erwin, and thanks, Bodhi. That's a great question. I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, finance is a really critical part of the climate policy, not just for Australia, South Asia, but also the global climate architecture. We really expect Australia to increase both the scale and also the strategic focus of its climate finance for the region. There are already encouraging signs. In the last term, the government committed 200 million support to Indonesia for climate infrastructure and around 100 million for Vietnam for clean energy. So these signal a clear shift in terms of climate finance for decarbonization, and it has become part of the Australia regional engagement. That said, there's still significant room for improvement. Australia Development Assistance currently stands at 0.19% of the gross national income. The OECD target for the OECD member is 0.5%. So there's a space there for greater ambition. And with stronger political will and growing support for climate actions from this election, we hope to see Australia to expand and better target its climate finance across South Asia. And this includes things like also mobilizing funding and financing in the lead up to COP31 to help close the gap in the so that we can meet the new collective quantified goal that was agreed last year in Baku. Australia also has an opportunity to lead unlocking transition finance by bringing together public and private sectors to support decarbonization. And to this, I think regional decarbonization is very important. Countries like Singapore can be a really valuable partner in area of shared interest, for example, advancing industrial decarbonization, nature-based solutions, or ocean-related climate initiatives and maritime decarbonization. This has already been an instrumental part of the Australia-ASEAN collaboration and also embedded in initiative, for example, the Australia-Singapore Green Economy Program. Thank you, Erwin.
Thanks, Trang. You mentioned there a couple of times COP31, and it's actually come up a few times in the conversation. So I might pass over to Anna. Australia is very much in the running to host COP31 in partnership with our Pacific Island neighbours. And the re-elected government is actively seeking to support the event in sunny Adelaide. I'm interested in your thoughts, Anna. You know, there's obviously COPs are international events, but they do have an impact on domestic policies around the world. What's your thought on how an Australian COP would actually affect domestic policy in this country?
31 is a big opportunity on multiple layers. So yes, there's a domestic policy ambition uplift moment due to the pressure that comes from being in the global spotlight. And the host is expected to put the best foot forward that they can on climate action. And in particular, in Australia's case, the Australian government has agreed that if it's awarded the hosting, it would co-host with the Pacific Islands. And the Pacific Islands, of course, face an existential threat from climate change and are very clear in their expectations of more support and more urgent action. So there is domestic pressure that flows from playing that host role. And we see that not just from COPs when there's G20, nations lift when these moments come. But in addition, it's a demonstration moment too. I know that our peers in the climate movement all around the world are keen that the spotlight shines on what is going well in Australia. So we know that there's more to do, but also Australia is already showing progress as a fossil fuel economy that's transitioning to renewable energy and is committing to go further and to go faster with the decarbonisation of the electricity grid and the high percentage of renewables, plus new industrial policy that is showing government's clear intention under the Future Made in Australia agenda and the renewable energy superpower ambitions to really show that we could be a mining economy that's powered by green energy, as well as investing in new value-added opportunities. So it's very early days for that policy, but already the solar PV rooftop story is making world headlines. That Australia is up there in the medal podiums for highest penetration per capita. So there's an expectation on Australia to tell that story and to tell it well. But domestic improvements on policy and showcasing is not the only opportunity that comes from a COP, because what's important about this COP in next year, if it comes to Australia, is that it's an implementation COP. So a lot of COPs focus on the targets and the promises and the commitments like the NDCs, and they are due this year. And so the Brazil COP will have a focus on the NDCs, and that it's really important that they continue to ratchet, and that's the universal agreement that the world has signed up to in Paris. But next year, the focus will be on implementation actions. And so COPs have moved beyond the UN negotiations, and they are now a marketplace as well. They remain a global gathering. And when the focus is on implementation, which it would be in COP31 in Australia next year, then the opportunity is to really turn to what does it take. And we know that Australia's own ambitions for renewable energy superpower and a green energy powered resources economy can't happen without trade partners also decarbonising, because there are buyers and sellers on every transaction. And so COP has become a marketplace for alliances and pledges as a proxy for what was the original ambition of global carbon pricing, of course. And so absent that as an international orchestration mechanism, we see a patchwork of commitments called carbon border adjustment mechanisms, new pledge alliances for co-investments, and working with the willing type leadership. And we've seen public and private investments increasing in scale at each of those implementation COPs. So the big opportunity for the Australian COP will be to shine a spotlight on that and make sure that commitments for investment and action, that deals get done and that they are cross-border, because we know that emissions flow beyond national borders, and net zero pathways require the whole supply chain to be decarbonised. So Australia can take a leadership role in working with the Asia Pacific trade partners and encourage that the COP focuses on this, taking those national goals into the international arena of global trade and other orchestration arrangements through policy alignment.
Thanks, Anna. So that's the end of the pre set questions. So if you've just joined us, welcome to Climateworks Centre's briefing room. I'm Erwin Jackson, the head of Australian programs at Climateworks, and our panelists have been given their post-election take on Australia's climate policy opportunities, including deepening relationships with Southeast Asia, demonstrating climate leadership on the global stage through COP31, and turning ambition into action by implementing key policies to drive down emissions. If you're watching this on YouTube, please take a moment to like the video to make sure that other people see it and the algorithms do their work, and subscribe to our channel so you can keep up to date with Climateworks' ongoing engagements. I'm going to open the floor to questions. We've received a lot of questions during the session, as well as dozens of pre-submitted ones. We'll try and get through as many as possible today. But let's go to the first question. Anna Malos, you noted this was an energy election, and energy and the electricity sector are critically linked to all others. Can you expand on this? You're on mute, Anna. Well, while Anna's
Sorry,
doing that,
that was...
there you go.
Apologies. I lost my button. It was indeed an energy election, and perhaps the emphasis was more on the supply side. So looking at, Australia's target to get to 82% renewable energy and then go beyond that, so that we really do have the electricity sector we need that then can scale up and not only reduce emissions within its own sector, but also reduce emissions well beyond that in industry, in the built environment, and in transport. However, where Climateworks really sees the sort of missing opportunities is much more on that demand side. And in the next few years, we've got perfect opportunity to get the rules right across the system so that that demand and supply side are working much more effectively together. Our rules were designed sort of several decades ago when the electricity system and our energy system had very different needs and really was quite stable. It was about big, large-scale generators and a fairly stable demand. The world's now changed. Renewable energy is the cheapest way of replacing our aging coal-fired generators. However, most of that renewable energy is variable. And we've also got increasing variability on demand. And that's partly because energy use in homes is a far greater part rather than industry, which tends to be more stable. So we want to really have a system that encourages the best use of that demand side. So that's making our buildings perform better, like I mentioned, but then going beyond that and looking at how can you make sure that our energy use is matched to when the cheapest supply is available. So when the sun is shining, when the wind is blowing at its greatest, and also thinking about how we can store energy and so it can be used when there's the biggest gap between supply and demand. So that's and one of the things we think is that there could be something that's called a demand statement of opportunities, or DSO. Now, the electricity sector already has this, that really focuses on supplies. The gas system has it, and we want to see the energy use, the demand side have it, and to look at, what are the rules that will help people, choose to use less electricity where it's in shortest supply and most expensive. How industry can be incentivized to have equipment that means that they can have what's called demand response. They reduce their demand when needed, and how they can store electricity so that you can shift when cheap electricity is available compared and move it to a kind of when there are that supply demand mismatch. And really, so beyond that demand statement of opportunities, we've also got ideas in all of those sectors about how users can really, contribute to the energy system being cheap, reliable, and clean.
Thanks, Anna. And so we've had a related question to expand that out into the region. I'm going to throw this to Trang. We've got the ASEAN Asia Australia Summit in October. It's been presented as a key opportunity for strategic alignment. How can Australia use its expertise in renewable energy and transition planning to help co-develop long-term clean energy roadmaps for Southeast Asian partners in the ASEAN member states?
Thanks, Erwin. It's good to see a lot of initiatives and opportunity for exchanging ideas between Australia and ASEAN. And I think the Australia-ASEAN Summit will be such a great opportunity. In terms of and I would see there's different angle there. So the first thing, it's such kind of summit and platform. It's really a good opportunity to spotlight and champion initiative. There's some really great initiative going on, like the Australia-ASEAN Regional Grid Connectivity. We also think that it's an opportunity to showcase some of the great success of the green energy hubs from our work on net zero industrial precincts program. There's a lot of good knowledge sharing between Australia and Vietnam and Indonesia. And there's a good lesson learned from both sides to see the success and the opportunities and also challenges of establishing green energy hubs in the region and how it can be connected and establish a supply chain. The second thing I would say, we shouldn't undermine the importance of B2B, business-to-business connection, and showcasing some of trade investment opportunities. The IEA report shows that for every dollar of investment for fossil fuel in South Asia, only 0.8 in clean energy. Whereas the international rate, it's like basically for every dollar of fossil fuel, you got $2 investment in clean energy. So there's so much more to do in terms of scaling up investment on clean energy in South Asia. And our research actually shows that the underinvestment of clean energy in South Asia comes from various reasons. It can include policy certainties, but then it can also include things like perceived risks from investors who see lower middle income countries might be higher risks. And in order to reduce those perceived risks, I think the best thing is actually to build capacity of businesses, bring connecting business together and fostering dialogue between business and government. I think we should, and that's what we learned from the Australia-Vietnam Green Economy Program, where we bring together business and government. And I think that's a really good platform to foster those kind of dialogue. Thanks, Erwin.
Thanks for that. And I'm going to go back to Anna Malos for a second, then I'm going to throw a double barrel question to Anna Skarbek on nature and the enthralling topic of climate reporting. But we've heard in both of those sections that the energy system is not just about renewables, of course. We do have coal in the system, we do have gas in the system, and you'd be pretty hard to not have missed recent news about the role of gas in the transition, both here in the region. So, Anna Malos, do you have any comment on that? Like, we're obviously seeing a lot of news about gas in the transition. What would you say to that question?
First thing I'd like to emphasize is that we see gas as a fuel in transition, because burning gas and using gas does create emissions. And so, in the long term, that the uses of gas can be replaced by other fuels. In the short term, it remains important, it's whether that's in our houses, in industry, or in the electricity system. However, when we look at, when our analysis looks at how to get to net zero emissions most cost effectively, we really do see the use of gas domestically phasing out, and that's because electrification with renewable energy is cheaper and it's more beneficial across the system. So it's the question of, when are the technologies available to replace gas for different things? Now, in our houses, electrification is already, cheaper, and it's better for our health. Not burning gas in the home is better for our health. In industry, it's a mixed picture. Some uses of gas in industry are quite hard to replace. Others, including low temperature heat, the technologies are there already. So, and this, so within Australia, we can see how gas can be replaced, but also internationally, it can be replaced as well. And so Australia's role should be looking at what are our green energy resources that we can export instead of coal and gas, and also looking to, support our partners in the region, our trade partners, our kind of the countries around us, and support how they can make that transition as well. I'd add one other thing, which is the International Energy Agency has looked at the global transition and looked at, energy use in terms of getting to net zero emissions by 2050, which is what we know we need to avoid dangerous climate change. Now, they have, their analysis shows that you really don't need new gas resources, new gas basins, because the ones that the world has already is enough within to fulfill the energy needs within a carbon budget.
Thanks, Anna. So Anna Skarbek, we're operating in a system. Energy is just part of it. And we've had a question about how does nature fit in here? What is the role of the government's role in doing in terms of protecting and restoring biodiversity in our forests and agricultural land? And I did warn you that I'll give you a double-barreled one. The second is really around the role of business and finance. We've got a mandatory disclosure framework that's been implemented in Australia. Will that turn reporting into action? So the question really is, yes, we've got the reporting, but will businesses start setting targets and actually reduce emissions as a result?
Thanks, Erwin. And I'm passionate about both of these, and there is a link between the two. The mandatory corporate reporting on climate disclosures, the person asked the question, will it lead to targets and action? It requires disclosure if companies have targets. What we know is that investor pressure and societal pressure has already led most major companies and investors to have net zero targets. So yes, most companies will have a target, therefore need to disclose. And the legislation goes a lot further and says, if you have a target and you're disclosing it, please disclose the plans you have to achieve it. And quite a bit of detail in legislative format. Our colleagues are also working on a guide for what does good look like when you are disclosing your plans. What's a really credible plan that aligns with the goals of the Paris Agreement? So yes, we are seeing the bar rise. It's only commencing next month, this legislation. So, expect a bit of a curve upward in terms of the implementation, but it's very transparent, and international finance is global. So information moves quickly, and I think that bar should rise quickly. The link to nature is also important in the same question. The question was, are we a bit behind in protecting nature? Well, absolutely. The Kunming protocol, the biodiversity framework, is the Paris Agreement equivalent for biodiversity and nature. And it was only signed about almost a decade after the Paris Agreement. So yes, nature is behind climate in terms of those global agreements and frameworks. But we now have them. And it's beginning to get translated into the same sorts of frameworks that have been used for climate, global targets, national targets, and the corporate reporting. So we had the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, and now we have the task force on nature-related financial disclosures. And the International Standards Board for Accounting and Reporting is now working on the nature equivalent of those standards that have informed Australia's legislation on climate. So whilst nature might be a decade behind in the original UN treaties, actually we can leapfrog the time of implementing it by aligning the response to nature with the response to climate and using the same frameworks that we have now for climate disclosures. We will still need policy frameworks for this action on managing our land and including the consideration of nature in supply chains. And again, Climateworks has been working on this and will be sharing a lot more of that later in the year. But we have supported the Natural Capital Measurement Catalogue, and the question about regenerative agriculture can look to that, an open source resource for how we could see those sorts of practices valued. And then there'll need to be policy to support the early adopters of these practices, just as we've seen support for the early adopters of renewables, and now that's becoming more mainstream. We know what to do, but it is yet to be done to the same extent, and we look forward to supporting the alignment of that so that we don't lose more time. Because what you often hear on energy, there's no transition without transmission, as one of the lines. We also know there's no net zero without nature, that we need enormous nature repair and sequestration to reach net zero, but also to maintain planetary stability and the other nature services that biodiversity gives us. So we've got an opportunity to move faster on nature in the coming years by doing this together.
Thanks, Anna. We're running out of time, but I have one last question for each of the panelists before we sort of wrap up today's discussion, and I'm going to go with people on my screen. So I think I'll go to Trang first, then Malos, and then Anna Skarbek. As I mentioned earlier in my introduction, I've been working on climate policy for many decades, and it's been a great pleasure to watch the success that Climateworks has had in terms of delivering outcomes on climate for the nation and the region. But as we've also articulated in terms of what the panelists have outlined, there's vast amounts to do. So I'm going to ask you to step back a bit and ask what makes you individually the most excited about the impacts that you can see Climateworks having over the next 3 years. So over to you first, Trang.
Thanks, Erwin. I think that that's a great question. I would frame it around what inspired me most to work on in the last 3 years being part of Climateworks. I think actually 3 years ago, I joined Climateworks, so nearly 3 years now. When I think it's really good to see, first of all, a strong connection between Australia and South Asia region, and especially on issues like energy transition. And there's so much similarity for both countries and regions to work together and to foster this partnership. The second thing, I think there's a lot of narratives at the moment in South Asia on the nexus between industrial strategies and industrial decarbonizations, like basically how countries can make sure that we scale up decarbonization, but also achieve the potential growth needed in order to, as a lot of countries in South Asia are still in the verge of like sort of lower middle income countries. So there's really a good opportunity from our industrial decarbonization work, place base, to actually scale up the narratives of how decarbonization can happen in a place, in a region, and how can it support the industries, the regions, economically, also socially from the jobs perspective. So that's what I'm really inspired to work on in the last few years, and I look forward to continue to make the case and to prove the nexus between economic and transition in the next few years as well. Thanks, Erwin.
Thank you. And Malos.
Well, I've touched on this already, but it really is about the way in which our work can show that decarbonising our economy is about economic opportunity, and it really is about making the changes that benefit all of us, you know, looking for those win-wins, whether it's for a particular region or whether in a sector. And there's all sorts of work that Climateworks is doing to, you know, really explore where we can get those win-wins and, you know, what it means to get over the barriers and challenges to unlock those economic opportunities. And I'm just excited to kind of keep on, you know, getting that kind of work out there. I'm a complete, you know, I'm a geek on all these things. So I love the knowledge we create, but I really love, you know, sort of making sure that people understand it, and whether that's the politicians or the departments, the technocrat, you know, or the people we work with, our partners. And yeah, that's what excites me. And, you know, I've been doing it for many a year, as you mentioned, and I'm still excited. So I think the next 3 years is a great opportunity for all of us.
Thanks, Anna. So Anna Skarbek.
Well, Climateworks, we're passionate about net zero pathways, and I now see the potential for normalising net zero in policy and in investment. The next 3 years is the extension of turning foundations into normal practice and embedding it into green trade in Asia Pacific. So net zero pathways have been mapped. We know that by Climateworks and CSIRO, and now also by government through Climate Change Authority, and in the private sector with finance sector and many businesses and state governments too. So the opportunity in the 3 years ahead is to embed these pathways through the 6 sector plans nationally, and through the companies reporting and needing to understand what they need to do, and they recognise that they need to work together and help their sectors achieve net zero pathways. Now that the goals are clearer, the actions can become more embedded in normal features of policy and practice across government, investment, households and business. Plus, we can't decarbonise our own economy without our trade partners decarbonising theirs too. So in the current tariffs-led economic disruption globally, I also see that it's a moment for the Asia Pacific region to rise in between US and China. And I'd love to see net zero pathways be a condition of free trade alliances or green trade corridors, guiding how nations work together across their shared supply chains with agreements to co-invest in the technologies that work along those net zero pathways and bring the emissions down in their industrial precincts and across their joint supply chains, so that we jointly achieve net zero and make the most of disruption when we want to show alliances with our trading nation friends.
Well, thank you all. It's been an excellent conversation and discussion. And yes, this couldn't have happened without the panel. So Trang Nguyen, Anna Malos, and Anna Skarbek, really appreciate the time today. But also critically, this wouldn't happen without the folks behind the scenes. So Simon LeBrown, Sophie Stefanakis, and Tara Hornglen. Thank you very much for the support in making all this happen. But critically also, Climateworks is a philanthropically funded organisation, and we extend our heartfelt appreciation to our donors. Your support makes our work possible, and we warmly welcome new partners to join us in bridging the gap between research and action. You can find out more about our work and catch up on this in previous briefing rooms at climateworkscentre.org. We will send you a recording of this session in coming days, so keep an eye out on your inbox. And we hope you can all join us for our next briefing event. More information on that session will be coming soon. But again, a heartfelt thanks for everyone for joining us, and hope to see you next time. Take care.